this one. Okay, so roughly the coverage of game theory is going to be in sort of 3 parts. Each of them is going to take roughly 2 lectures, I guess. But the first part, which I'm going to continue with today, is terminology, and just getting, because it is, game theory uses terminology which you don't see anywhere else. I'm going to spend a lot of time on terminology and the fundamental concepts. The second part is what's called solution concepts. That means, what does it mean to solve a game? And we'll talk about that a little bit today, and we'll go into some standard solution concepts. There are quite a few of them. And then the third part, we'll talk about a particular kind of game called mechanism, and we'll look at the design of mechanisms, and in particular what's called the Vickery-Clark-Groves mechanism, which is standard mechanism. So today is basically, just kind of nuts and bolts of how to even talk about games, because these are the foundations. So I would really urge you to, after the lecture, go back and read through the chapter and try doing some of the homework exercises that are related. Because if you don't understand this stuff and have it really clear in your head, then when you start doing solution concepts next week, you won't be able to understand it. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to continue with the notion of strategy and define what a strategy profile is, and then look at representation. It turns out the 2 standard ways of representing games, normal and extensive forms, so we'll talk about that, and some not so obvious problems with these representations. I guess I should talk about graphical games as well. And then this is just a representation, and then into what happens in the game. We have something called response, best response, and then that naturally leads to what's called dominant strategy. What is the best thing you can do? And then I'll look at 2 different kinds of games, Bayesian and repeated games, and then that will give us enough to start thinking about solution concepts. What is it? How do you solve a game? So let me start at the top with this notion of strategy. Remember that in a game we have a certain number of players. For the moment, just assume there are a finite number of players, and the players have actions. Actions are what you do at each move. So in chess, for example, your action would be you could move the bishop 1 step or 2 steps or whatever, depending on whether it can move or not. So those are the actions available to you. Action is not the same as strategy. Okay. A strategy is an encoding of all possible actions that you could take for the whole game. Okay, and it's an abstraction. In reality, you cannot do that. Maybe you have to. It has to be infinitely long description. But the easiest way to understand a strategy is the sequence of actions that you would play given the past history of the game and your future expectation on the game. And you can think of the strategy as being a program that you submit to some game playing site. Okay, so let's say you have online chess and you write a chess program and you walk away from it, and the program does everything else. That's a strategy. Okay, and it can be fairly complex, but in the games that we look at, the strategies are pretty straightforward. The strategies come in 2 types. Okay. And one is called a pure strategy, and one is called a mixed strategy. And we briefly looked at this last time. A pure strategy says that it says go do this, and if the response is this, then do that. It's a complete encoding of what you're going to do. And a mixed strategy is a random variable defined over the domain of the pure strategies. So if you have some set of pure strategies, S1, S2, etc., since you have n pure strategies, then the mixed strategy essentially assigns some probability P1, P2, Pn to these pure strategies, and so that's what's going on over here. Now there is a confusion that that people have with pure versus mixed strategy, which is that that mixed strategy doesn't give you any randomization once the strategy starts. Okay, it's not giving you all degrees of freedom that you would want. Okay, and so one might have a game where you make a move, and then the next step you make has a probabilistic move, and next step is a probabilistic move, etc. That is something else. That's called a behavioral strategy, but that's not what we're talking about over here. Here we're saying there's a deterministic choice of a strategy, and that's a pure strategy. And in a mixed strategy, you have you decide basically one of the pure strategies to play, and then you just play the pure strategy. So it restricts the total number of strategies available to you, but this is the way the classical game theory is developed. So we won't question that, but that's the way it's done. So the way it would work is something like this. So you have let's say you have a tic-tac-toe website where you submit your tic-tac-toe program, your chess website, you submit your chess program, and the chess programs play each other. This is not just made up. You actually can do that. There are sites where you can actually submit a chess program. In a pure strategy, you just submit one program. In a mixed strategy, you submit, let's say, 20 different programs, and then you say, okay, I'm going to throw this random number, and then I'm going to pick one of those programs to play. Okay, but once you pick that program, then after that it's essentially deterministic. So that's the difference between pure and mixed strategies. And we talked about this game called matching pennies. So in matching pennies, just an example. So you have two pennies, and you have two players, row and column. It will become clear in a minute why they're called row and column. So if you get head, then or tail, then row wins. Okay, and then it's head, tail, or tail, head, column wins. Okay, so that's the game. And so the pure strategy over here for each player is just either play heads or play tails. That's all you can do. It's a pure strategy. And then if you have a mixed strategy, then you have some probability of playing heads or probability of playing tails. Okay. As you can see over here, the strategies here are essentially the same as action because it's just one single move. But if you had more, then strategies and actions would be different. Okay. So this is just a little bit of terminology over here. Any questions about this so far? Is this just reviewing what we did last time? Okay, so just as a notation, SI is the representation for strategy. Strategies are denoted S. So this is strategy 1 for a particular player, etc. Now, if we have, let's assume we have n players. And player 1 plays strategy S1, player 2 plays strategy S2, etc. Then the set of strategies would be defined as S1, S2, Sn. So that's a tuple, and that says, these are the strategies that were played. And then what we have is we have a payoff that's given to the first player. So pi1 denotes the playoff to the first player from this strategy profile. So each player says, I'm going to play this strategy. They each play the strategy, and then the game proceeds. Okay, the rules of the game decide based on the strategies what's going to happen. At the end of that, you get a payoff, and that's essentially the utility from the game outcome when ith player plays SI. Okay, so we can think of the game as allocating, or as a function that maps strategy profiles to payoffs. Okay, where the payoff is again a tuple, right? So we have a tuple of payoffs, and we say, okay, if I play these strategies, I get this payoff. So in other words, a game is nothing more than a function. Okay, game is nothing more than a function that goes from the set of strategies, the cross product of the strategy spaces for each of them. So strategy space is a set of possible strategies. Okay, maybe I should just put that over here. Strategy space okay, for ith player is the allowed strategies And the allowed strategies can be mixed or pure. Okay, we're just saying it's just part of the strategy space. So clearly it's an infinite space because you can have any probability of mixing that we want. But so we just take the product of all the strategy spaces, and then we allocate the payoff, and essentially that's a game. So from our perspective, we can just translate gains into mathematical functions, and now we just study the properties of these functions. So that's sort of the essence of mathematical game theory. We'll come to that in just a minute. Just to make the ideas clear, so let's look at the okay. Right. So in the game of matching pennies, again the same game. Okay. So the pure strategies are A, head, or T. So the strategy space, right, is this H, T. Okay. So what are the profile? The profile looks like this. The profiles are H, 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 T, T, H, T, T. Right. Those are the 4 possible strategy profiles. And the rules of the game say that if the row player, or HH comes up or TT comes up, then the row player wins. So we can write down now the payoff to row player on HH, and that's basically utility of win. Okay. Similarly, we have the payoff to row player of HT. That's the utility of lose, and pay row of TH, that will be utility of lose, and payoff to the row player of TT will be utility of win. Okay, I'm just writing it down just to show you how this works. Okay, so we have essentially pi r is a payoff function, and that maps. You can think of this as pi r as mapping from the set of profiles to utility of outcome, so that there is a clear mapping from the strategy profile to the outcome, and from the outcome we have utility, and so we can say, all right, so similarly we have payoff for the column player, same kind of thing. It goes from profile to the utility of outcome. So these are similar functions over here. Okay? So hopefully we can see now 2 things. First is that we have strategy profiles which essentially tell you exactly what all the players are going to do. Okay? You can think of each player as writing down the strategy on a piece of paper, putting it in an envelope, and then giving it to some disinterested third party. The third party opens the envelope, sees these as strategies, and says, okay, the profile is the set of envelopes, and says, it then executes rules of the game. At the end of it, it says player 1 or player 2 or whatever player won, and somebody else lost, and says, okay, here are the outcomes, and then each of them has their own personal utility from that outcome. Okay, remember that the utilities are personal, so we don't really know the outcomes. So just say, here are the outcomes, you figure out for yourself how much you liked it. Okay, and that's the structure of a game. All right. Any questions about this over here? Okay, so all right. So now that we've done this, given that the game is just a mapping from strategy profiles to outcomes, and from outcomes to utilities, this automatically suggests to us a particular representation called the normal form representation. And let me just show that over here. So the normal form representation is, you have it's essentially an n-dimensional matrix. To make life simple, we just consider a 2-dimensional matrix. Okay, so each dimension corresponds to player. So this would be the column player, and this would be the row player. That's why I call them row and column players. So these are the row player, that's a column player. Now remember that each player has a strategy available to it. So we'll just index this by the column by the strategy. So it's S1. So we can call it SR1, SR2, etc. And let's say it has n strategies, so SRN, and similarly it has SC1. So these are the strategies. And what happens in the game? The game says that when you play this strategy and that strategy, okay, then some outcome happens, and at this outcome you're each going to get some payoff. Okay, that is your utility. Again, the person running the game doesn't really care what the utility is. They just say, well, this is what happened. You won or you lost, so you got this much reward. Okay, and then it's up to them to interpret that. But in the definition of the game, we will assume that we know what the utilities are. Okay, we assume that the players have told us this is the value they assign to the outcome, and we write over here the utility. So we'll basically write, U1, U2 over here because it's a two-dimensional game, and then we write this down over here. Okay, utility of 1 and utility of, I should probably call it row and C, utility of row and utility of column from this outcome, whatever the outcome is. Again, we're just mapping from these two inputs to that output, and we're writing down the outcomes, the utility of the outcomes over here. And this is called the normal form. It's just a way to represent a function. Okay. That's basically it. Any questions about this over here? Okay. So the couple of notes I wanted to make over here. The first one is that these moves are simultaneous. Okay, and so we can assume that they, as I said, they put their envelopes down and they walk away. So and then there's a second thing is a particular problem with representation, but I'll come to that after. I want to do a couple of examples. So let me do a couple of quick examples, and then we can take a break, and then I'll talk about the quirk in the normal form representation. So well, we already have enough to write down the representation of matching pennies. So here's a matching pennies game. We have, in this case, each player has two strategies, heads or tails, and we'll assume arbitrarily that the utility of win is 1 and the utility of lose is -1. Okay, so we can immediately see that this is what it looks like. So right away we see that this game is symmetric. Okay, what we mean by symmetric is that everything off diagonal is a mirror image. So it's the same. I'm sorry. So you have -1 1, you have -1 1. Okay, so so basically TH and HT are the same. So it's why it's symmetric. Okay, and the second thing is that zero sum. When somebody wins, somebody else loses. And it's symmetric, over here. But there are different kinds of symmetry, of course. But in this particular case, the symmetry is that TH and HT are the same. In many games, the analysis is done through symmetry. You say, well, if it's symmetric, I just have to analyze it for one player, and all other players are equivalent. Here, of course, row and column are not equivalent. They have different notions. But it turns out that there's a different kind of symmetry we can exploit over here. And I'll talk about how to use that when we do solving a game later, but I just wanted to point that out just so you can see it. Here's another game. This is matching pennies. Here's another game. So just as a note, there's a standard set of games that all game theory books talk about. It's called The Prisoner's Dilemma, Matching Pennies, there's something called Battle of the Sexes, and something called the Chicken Game, and we'll actually study all of those. And I said, this is crazy. I need to do something which is not in all the books. Let me come up with my own game. And so I came up with something called the Wi-Fi game. And so, in fact, I have something new to say here, I guess. And what I'm trying to do is to model the 802.11 protocol. So for those of you who are not familiar with the 802.11 protocol, all you need to know is that we have a set of stations. Each station is like a laptop or something. And if one station sends, they succeed. If two stations send, they fail, Okay, they collide, and they have to try again. So that's the Wi-Fi game. And now we have 3 possible outcomes. Either you succeed, or you fail, or you say, look, I'm going to do nothing because I think somebody else is going to do something, so I want to do nothing. Right? So the strategies that you have available to each player are what I call send or defer. So that we call S and D. So either you send something or you don't, okay, at any point in time. So we'll call that send and defer. So that's the strategies available to the row player. Let's just consider a 2x2 version of this. And similarly, we have the send and defer for the column player, assuming just 2 active stations. Of course, you have to remember that we have n players, so we have an n-dimensional matrix with n possible people all trying to do send or defer. If any one person sends, great, they make success. If more than one person sends, then we get failure. Okay? So now we have to look at the possible outcomes. The outcomes are, one is blank or idle. Okay? You can have progress, okay, or collision. Right? Idle means nothing happened. Progress means somebody made progress. Somebody sent some unit of data. Collision means 2 people sent, or 2 or more people sent. And what happens when you have collision, actually it's very bad. Because not only did nothing get sent, but you also used up energy, okay, which you could, which wastes your battery. So if you're a laptop and you send something and you collide, you waste it. So what we can do is we can model this outcome by saying, okay, progress is, let's say it's 1, and then idle is 0, okay, and then collision actually is -1. It actually hurts me. So again, remember, utilities are unique only up to an affine transform. So I can just arbitrarily give these values 0, 1, and -1. Okay, and the game is symmetric. That means that whatever payoff, this is a different kind of symmetry than here. Okay, here is symmetric in the sense that I don't, player 1, player 2 are basically having the same kind of incentive structure. So what happens if they both send? They both get -1, right? Because they both have collision. If he sends, if row sends and column defers, you get 1, 0. If otherwise it's symmetric, so you get 0, 1. This is the opposite kind of symmetry over here. Then you get 0, 0 if they both defer. Okay, so this is the Wi-Fi game. So a couple of points I want to make about this. The first thing is that immediately we start beginning to see over here how game theory helps. Okay, I can tell you the Wi-Fi protocol, 802.11 protocol, is quite complex. The full description is several hundred pages long and very complex. And if I were to try to sit down and ask you, analyze this, tell me how it's going to work out, it's very hard. But if you represent it in this fashion, where you view each station as essentially trying to maximize its own utility, maximize its own behavior, you can represent pretty much the entire heart of the problem in just one simple table, okay, in just one simple matrix over here. And that's what makes game theory very powerful, because we can start modeling these things, assuming that each station is a rational entity that is trying to maximize its own utility. What this really means in practice is that it's possible that a manufacturer of a Wi-Fi device is going to mess with the parameters to improve the performance of their devices. So if you have a room and everybody has a laptop and you have a chipset from, say, Broadcom, it might perform better than chipset from Intel. So the 2 Broadcoms, they both will share 50-50. But if there's Intel and 2 Broadcoms, the Broadcoms will get 40%, the Intel will only get 20%. Okay, it's possible that will happen. And so you'll say, oh, the Broadcom chipset is better. Let me buy Broadcom chipsets. Okay, this is not a fantasy. This actually happens. There's a paper out there which actually measured these chipsets and finds that they've gone and tuned these parameters to make them improve the performance of certain manufacturers. So this is the game they're playing. Okay, and you can see again right away we can get a pretty decent understanding of what's going on. And what we're going on over here is, if you defer, you have over here, but if you go into this side, you send, you have the possibility that you can make progress, or you can go over here, and then you have collision. You don't really know what's going to happen. Okay, so I'm not going to analyze this just yet, but I'm just going to show you that we can represent the game in normal form in this fashion. So these are the 2 games I wanted to represent. And okay, so let me take a small break here, and then we'll continue with the extensive form after this over here. So a normal form game is okay for representing small games with simultaneous moves. But consider chess, right? What do you do in chess? Well, it's I mean, you have the strategies are very large number, a very large number of strategies to begin with, and it's not even clear, how to represent the alternating move structure, okay? Because you have one player playing, another player playing, and more importantly, when the first player plays, they don't know. I mean, it's a fresh board, but when the second player plays, they can see what the first player has done. Okay, they can see what the first player has done, and that also restricts the amount of work you can do. So in this case, it's more convenient to represent a game like this. So you have a tree, what's called the game tree, and this corresponds to player 1, for example, and then each of these nodes corresponds to a possible action, not a strategy, but possible action of player 1, and then each of these nodes, all of these nodes over here correspond to player 2, and then each of the possible actions that they can take, and so on. Okay, so you have player 1, player 2, and then maybe you have player 1 again. Those are all the nodes, and you draw this tree over here. In the case of chess, for example, let's say white plays first. Now we have only a set of moves that you can make. You can move all the pawns, you can move the horses, and that's about it, right? And each pawn can make either 1 or 2 moves, 2 steps. So we have 16 moves, plus each horse can have 2 positions to play in, so a total of 20 moves. Okay, so we have a branching tree of saying all possible 20 moves for the white player. At this point, the black player can only make also 20 moves. Okay, so we have the same kind of thing, 20 moves out. So we have basically 400 moves over here. And then after that, things get more complicated. Okay, but not extraordinarily so. I mean, at any point in time, typically each player can make between 20 and 100 moves, not more than that, because there are not that many things to do. So, well, you can go ahead and represent that, right? And you can go ahead and write that down, and that gives you what's called the extensive form version of the game. Okay, so comparing these two forms, you see it looks as if they are not equivalent. Okay, because in the normal form we actually haven't seen the future strategies of the other players. You can't actually see the board, and in the extensive form we cannot represent simultaneous moves. For example, look at the matching pennies game over here. What's the extensive form version of this game? Right? Well, we have two choices. Either we have the row column go first, row player go first, and have two choices, heads or tails, and then the column player plays heads or tails. But at this point, the column player already knows what row player did. Okay, and so the column player is going to win always, right? But that's not true. Column player cannot move, cannot see what the row player is going to do. So what we have to do is we introduce a notational convenience which allows us to represent simultaneity in the extensive form game, and we do that with this dashed line over here. So this dashed line over here means that the column player, okay, let's say this is row and these correspond to column. The dashed line means that the column player cannot differentiate between these two nodes. It's as if these two are in sort of this opaque hidden set and you don't know what it is. And this set is called the information set. Okay, it's called, and all nodes in the same information set are equivalent. Okay, so now we can represent simultaneity, because with if the previous person has made a move and you're supposed to make a move at the same time, all the actions of the previous player will be put into the same information set, and therefore we kind of look at this node and all of these plus all of these together as being one simultaneous move by both players, and this generalizes. With enough dashed lines, you can generalize this to having n players and so on. Okay, so that makes it possible. Okay, so that was the first objection, which is how can we represent simultaneity in extensive form games, and we can do that using this trick over here. The second objection you could have is, well, in a game like chess, when player 2 is there, they can see what player 1 did, right? And in the normal form representation, you can't actually do that, because how do you know what you're going to put over there? Actually, the second objection is not a valid one. Okay, why? Okay, anybody have why that's not a valid objection? Why is it that we can represent sequential play in the normal form? There's a seat over there, Amir. If you need. Okay. So how can we represent sequential play in the normal form strategies?
Using multiple metrics.
Using multiple metrics, no.
Because a single matrix will represent only the final.
Remember, I'm talking about this representing the game.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to represent the fact that the player 2 can see the action of the player 1 before deciding what action to play. Okay, eventually, yeah.
Maybe we can try to extend the table so that it will let the odds possible. The first one to, maybe for example, the first player do A, and the second player do B, then the table will run A, and the brand A, because they do A, then the
It doesn't have to be so complicated. Okay, she's saying, extending the table so you can actually have in the form over here A followed by B, or I don't know, A and then AB, or maybe A and then AB as being the different strategies that you have over here. No, it's actually simpler than that. Yes?
Can you break each unit into S1, S2, and S3? S2 is the same time S3 is the row goes first and column, and the other one is column goes first before row?
No, you don't need to do that. Yes, Usman.
Turn could be just another dimension in the matrix.
Turn can be a dimension in the matrix. No, the dimensions are for players, so we don't want to mess with that. Yes?
You can represent each move with a number, and then you have a sequence of numbers.
Right.
So with each player a sequence of moves, and they win or lose.
I mean, you're solving a different problem. I just want to say that in the normal form, I'm expecting these two strategies to be played at the same time, whereas in the extensive form, when player 2 plays, it can see what player 1 has played, right? I want to actually capture that. I'm saying these are not equivalent because of this problem. So I just want to, so you're solving a different problem. You're solving the path. You're saying the entire path from the root to the leaf can be encapsulated as a strategy. Yeah, but how about the informational content? The fact is that when I have this path from the root to the leaf over here in this extensive form, I can take out all the appropriate moves that belong to player 1, collapse them together and call them strategy, right? But what about the information, the fact that at this point I can see something else? How do I deal with that? So that your approach is not solving that problem. Nabil? You said something? Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. I thought I explained this pretty well. Maybe not. Remember, strategy is a full encoding of everything you could possibly do. Okay? A strategy can have if then else clauses inside it. So strategy can say, if player 1 plays this move, then I'm going to do this. If player 1 plays that thing, I'm going to play something else. Right? It's a complete program. It's a full program in whatever programming language you choose to have. So when I write down Si over here on this, here it's very, very simple. But if I write down a normal form game with S1 over here, S1 is a computer program. It's Turing complete. I can just say in S1, well, I'm going to look and see what the previous player did. If they did this, then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. All of that is encoded in S1, right? So there's no problem. Anything that is visible is an input to S1 at the time that S1 is played. Okay, so S1 over here essentially is a full encoding of all possible things that could happen in the game. Okay, and that's why we can represent it in normal form. So remember what S is, a strategy, right? I said a strategy is a complete description of all possible things that you need to do in a game. So you just give it and you walk away. And you can have multiple of these. So each one of them can be different. And S1 can say, If the time now is 2 p.m. and the player played this, then do this. If it's 3 p.m., then do this. We have no restrictions on what S1 is. So putting in any informational requirements of what is visible is really easy in a normal form game because we have complete control of what the strategies look like. Okay, do people get it? So the normal form game is a strategy is a pretty complex thing. It's not something straightforward, just like send and don't send, right? It can be as complex as you want it to be. Okay. So all of the people who gave me the wrong answers, you should think why you gave me the wrong answer, because I thought this was pretty straightforward. Okay. But you really, so this is very important to realize the strategy is not an action, and the strategy can take as input pretty much anything you want. Okay, it's a complete encoding. So this brings us to a third problem with the normal form, and I'm going to show you a game like this. Okay, so let's say the player 1 can play A or B, and then if the player 2 plays A or B, then player 2 can play Y or N, yes or no, and after that player 1 can play C or D. Okay, so this is player 1 again. Alright. So if player 1 plays A, the game is ended. There's nothing more to be done. The game is over. If player 1 plays B, then player 2 can play Y or N, and then after that player 1 can play C or D. Okay, straightforward thing. What are the strategies for? What does the strategies look for player 1? Okay, for player 2, the strategy is simple. It's either Y or N. Okay, the space is just Y or N. What are the strategies for player 1 in the normal form, or actually in any form? What are the strategies for player 1? Okay, anybody want to, honey?
A, B, C, or D. Actually A.
Yeah.
But then B, if Y, C or D, if N, again C or D.
B, okay. So, you have A, B, and then if Y, C, or D. So you're saying basically A, B, C, and A, B, D, right? I mean, you'll just take out the comma. So you're saying this is the thing: A, B, C, and B, D. And these are the strategies for A, right? So,
but what is the difference between this strategy and if we eliminate one branch?
Which branch?
Let's say there is no part.
Well, if there's no part,
it's again
it's
B,
still
C or BD.
Yeah, it's still BC or BD.
The strategy remains the same.
Strategy remains the same because you have to play the BC, you have to play BD, right? If I use orange, since somebody thoughtfully left me a chalk to represent A strategies, these are all the orange circles are A's moves. All right. So it turns out that in the normal form there is a convention which says that even though the game ends when the player 1 plays A, what we'll do is we won't use this. Instead, we'll represent the strategy like this: AC, AD, BC, BD. Okay. So BC and BD make sense, right? You're going down over here. What we're saying over here is that we actually have to represent in the normal form these two additional strategies, AC and AD. Okay, which kind of doesn't make sense because when you play A, the game is over anyway, right? At this point, the game has ended. You get whatever outcome you have, but the convention of game theory requires us to represent the normal form in this fashion, and the reason for doing it comes up when we start talking about solutions of games. So I'm not going to go into that right now. In particular, is what I call perfect equilibria require us to consider what's called off-path actions. But anyway, setting that aside, this is actually the strategy space. This is the way we represent it. So we have one extra row or column, whatever, depending on how you which side you put it in. Okay, so I just want to point out that what we have to do, therefore, is to essentially take the cross product of this and this. Okay, to get the strategy space in the normal form. Okay, and then the fact that when you're playing C, you can see what B has done. Well, that's okay. That's not a problem. That's already in the strategy. It's not something special that you need to do. So if you do these things, which is to, for example, it means expand the strategy space and use information sets and encode these strategies properly, so you know what the previous thing was, then it can be easily shown that normal form and extensive form are the same. They're equally powerful. So anything in normal form can be put in extensive form. Anything in extensive form can be put in normal form. And it's a homework question, okay, which means I've solved it, and you should solve it too. All right, so you should try it out, because I think it'll give you some idea of how to do this. And just to make things, so I have a extensive form game that I put together just to show you how to do this. So this is called the pricing game. It's you can call it the Rogers game if you want. So we have an ISP, and this ISP wants to introduce a new service. It's a new service. So, for example, Rogers may decide that they want to offer you storage service. You have each got several 100 gigabytes of stuff, and Rogers will store it for you because they have the capacity, and certainly all they need to do is put a few 100 terabytes of storage somewhere and then suck it up every night, and that would be a reasonable service. Perhaps you'll even pay for it. So the services, we don't know the services, but your utility from the service, okay, is going to be basically sum A minus the price. So this is how much gain, your stuff is getting backed up, so that's the value A, and then there's a price that's being charged for it, and so utility is going to be A minus price, and the prices can be low, medium, or high, okay, for the service. So they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what the market sensitivity is. So they're going to try some price. We're going to try 3 different prices. So you can model this game like this. So let's say low, medium, high. We'll call it 0, 1, and 2. Okay. So we can model the game in this fashion. So the Rogers in this case says, I'm going to choose a price, low, medium, or high. And then at this point, the user can make 2 decisions. Either yes, they want it, or no, they don't. If they say yes, I want it, then the utility to Rogers is going to be, I'm sorry, I'm calling it 1, 2, 3 in the text, in the notes, so I'll just call it 1, 2, 3. So the utility Rogers is going to be 1, and for the user is A minus 1. If they say no, nobody gets anything, so it's 0, 0. Okay. Similarly, for medium, it's going to be yes or no. And in this case, it's 2, A minus 2. If it's no, it's 0, 0. And against 3, A minus 3, 0, 0. So this is an example of a game theoretic analysis of introduction of a new service into a market, where now what we're going to do is we're going to try and analyze the game to see, okay, how do we make sure that there will be uptake? People are going to buy it or not. So this is giving you some intuition into how we can view the users of the service and the provider as being 2 parties in the game, and then we can model it in the form of extensive form game over here. Okay, there's not much more to be said about that. It's just an example of the extensive form. Okay, so any questions about this so far? Okay, so let me just now say, okay, we have this, so let's look at it a little bit more carefully and see how big these things get. All right, so let's just take chess, for example. So in the first move you can have up to 20 choices. In the second one, the tree is going to have 400 choices. And in the third move, you're going to have 400 times, let's say you have 20 moves each. Okay, actually probably more, but let's say 20 moves each, you have 8,000 choices, and so on. So basically, what you're going to get is 20 to the power I. I is the depth of the tree. Okay, now a chess game, you can have 15 moves, 20 moves. So we get something that's exponentially large. Okay, 20 to the power 15 is pretty large. Okay, it's like what is it? Roughly log 10 to the power 20 roughly. Yeah. So it's large. Okay. So representing that's just a set of that's the size of the game tree. Okay. And and if you just take alternate types and so on, we basically find that the payoff function is also very huge. Payoff matrix is very, very big. It's infeasible to represent it in normal form or extensive form. So this is true for many other games because the strategy space can be arbitrarily complex. So we have only 20 moves in a toy game like here. But let's say that in the Rogers game, we have looking at many different possible kinds of pricing strategies. We can look at many different kinds of service, etc. And people may not just have a yes or no, but they say, okay, I'm going to take your gold service, but not your silver service. I'm going to take this. I'm going to take that. You get more and more things. So generally speaking, in real life situations, the size of the game is just too large, okay, and to represent fully. And so we have two approaches to solve this. The first one is just ignore it, okay, just study small games with small tables and say, okay, everything is fine. And that has been the study of game theory until about 2001. People just said, well, we just study small games, and then big games, we don't care about. It's enough interesting stuff to do with small games, which is actually true. But in 2001, there was an interesting paper which talked about graphical games, which is what I'm going to talk about next, which is a new way of representing very large numbers of players in a compact fashion. And this is what it looks like. So what we're assuming in a graphical game is that your actions or actions of some player I depend only on actions of a few other players, J and K, okay, not about everybody else, okay. So in other words, I don't need to know what everybody else is doing. I just need to care about a certain small number of people in my neighborhood, okay. And if I know what they're doing, then I know what the outcomes are going to be for me. So let's say that we have, let me just draw this over here. So I, J, and K, each node represents a player. And what we have is, we have these links. It's an undirected graph. And then at this node over here, I have a three-dimensional matrix, I, J, K, where essentially what I'm drawing in this cube over here, in each cell of this cube, is the payoff to I for some strategy chosen by I, J, and K. So it's basically pi I, S, J, S, K. Okay? And similarly, J may be influenced by 2 or 3 other nodes. And then, in this case, has 4 neighbors. So then you'd have 4-dimensional matrix over here. And so each node, therefore, is only keeping track of some part of the complete normal form game. Okay? And it can be shown that the overall normal form game is just essentially a product space appropriately defined of all these submatrices that are defined over here. Okay? So it gets a bit messy, and analysis is not particularly easy to understand. However, the point I wanted to make here was, if you are going to be using game theory and you run into a situation where you have a large number of players and you can, however, the effects are isolated to only small subsets of these players, then you can represent these game in this fashion, a graph with essentially small normal form games at each node. And this is what's called a graphical game, and this is from Kearns. And there's a paper, as I said, from 2001, where they show the existence of what are called Bayesian solutions, Bayesian equilibria in Bayes-Nash equilibria in these graphical games. Okay, and I think there's a reference somewhere in the in the text over here, in the notes. Okay, so that's it. So basically, I'm talking about 3 different representations then. Normal, which is just a n-dimensional matrix, extensive, which is a tree, and graphical, which is a graph with matrices at each node. And it can be shown that a graphical game is equivalent to a normal form game. And in fact, a normal form game can also be broken down with suitable independence into a graphical game. So they're completely equivalent as well. Okay, and but this is a sort of a more recent change in representation. Any questions about this so far? Okay, so we've gotten beyond just the basic stuff. I'm going to spend a few minutes on response and best response, and then we can take a small break, I guess. So let's see. All right. Response. So I'm going to leave this up over here. So what we have over here in this entry is basically pi I, payoff to the ith player of some, let me just call that S, which is the strategies being played over there. Okay, it's a strategy profile. So let me just expand that out over here. So let's say we have a strategy profile So we have a strategy profile which we call S1, S2, Sn with n players. Okay. Then we define S minus I to be the strategy profile S1, S2, Si minus 1, Si plus 1, Sn. That is, you take the strategy profile, you remove Si from it, and we'll call it S minus I, and it's just a convenient notation. So now I want to define what's called a response. Okay, a response is essentially the choice that player I makes. Okay, so in the chess game, for example, intuitively we see that there is some action that is being played by the white player, and the black player is going to play some other action in response to that, and then the white player makes action as a response to that. Those are actions that are responses. But we can also think about responses to strategies. Okay, if I know that the strategy of the other player is S1 of that player, then what should be my response? Okay, I can choose some response. Okay, whatever my response is, that is a response. A response is basically a strategy, any strategy chosen by a player. Okay, in response to the other player's strategies. Okay. So the strategies that are the best response then becomes something that we want to care about. That is, what strategy should I play in order to be the best for me? Okay, if I am player I. So the strategy S star is Si star is I's best response, okay, to S minus I, okay, because everybody else is fixed at S minus I. We're not changing that. If pi I Si star S minus I, okay, is greater than equal to payoff to I from playing any Si, I guess Sji is what I'm calling it, S minus I for all Sji not equal to Si star. Okay, so basically if I play my strategy Si star, given that everybody else is playing S minus I, then I get as good as or better than payoff from playing any other strategy. It's called the best response. Okay, so the best response is conditional. So assuming everybody else is doing S minus I, this is my best response. That's the way to interpret it. Okay, and so I just wanted to bring it up because when we talk about Nash equilibria in a little bit, we'll see that we want to think about everybody playing the best response to everybody else. Okay, and that's essentially Nash equilibrium. But just the terminology here is important of what a best response means. So conditional on the strategy profile being S minus I, this is my best response to that particular strategy profile. Okay, so let's take a look at the Wi-Fi game again. So this is the matrix S D minus 1 minus 1. So that's my Wi-Fi game. And so now we can, the strategy profile over here is, basically SD, SS, etc. So if column player plays S, okay, the best response for the row player is going to be D, because 0 is greater than -1. If the column player plays D, the best response to row player is going to be S. Okay, and it's symmetric, so the same thing holds for the other people as well. Okay, so this basically tells you what the best response is. Okay, so intuitively this makes sense. If the other player is sending, you shouldn't be sending because you're going to hurt yourself. Okay, you should defer. And the other player is deferring, you should send. And that's all I'm saying over here. The best response to sending is to not send, and best response to not sending is to send. And this is what? Carrier sense. Okay, carrier sense in Ethernet or Wi-Fi, whatever, is exactly this matrix. Carrier sense says, if you hear somebody, don't send, because it's going to hurt you. So what you've proven, what you showed over here, is that carrier sensing is the best response in the game theoretic sense, okay, given the structure of the Wi-Fi game, which is not bad, because carrier sense is pretty basic building block for multiple access protocols, and it comes out essentially automatically out of the Wi-Fi game. Okay, of course, the Wi-Fi game is also true for wired networks. I just put in Wi-Fi to make it cool, but 802.3, which is wired Ethernet, has the exact same game structure as well. Okay. Any questions about this so far? Okay. All right. So let me go into a little bit more terminology. Wait. Right. I guess it's time for a break. Okay. Let's take a short break, and then after that, I'll talk about the dominant and dominated strategies. Dominated strategy. All right. So given a normal form game, let's just take a two-player normal form game. We have a whole bunch of strategies that we could play over here for S1, and similarly this guy could play any strategy S2. Which one do you pick? There's so many choices. What do you actually do? So it turns out that there is a nice strategy combination that S1 could pick if the following were true. Let's say that S1 plays this strategy such that no matter what the other person plays, this strategy is the best. Okay. In other words, the payoff from playing here are better than payoffs playing anywhere else over here, no matter what. Okay. So if you remember Etch-a-Sketch, which was a continuous, you'll see right away that the Etch-a-Sketch is nothing more than what? It's a payoff matrix. It's a normal form game with continuous strategy space on both dimensions. That's why Etch-a-Sketch is said it can represent all games, because all it is a multi-dimensional Etch-a-Sketch. Okay, you can generalize to 10-dimensional Etch-a-Sketch. You can represent 10-dimensional games. But anyway, if it turns out that if the horizontal guy chooses a line such that no matter what happens, no matter where you pick, this line is going to be the highest point, okay, on that space, then it doesn't matter. I don't care whether the player over here is going to move it here or here or here or here. It doesn't matter where they are. It's always the best. Okay. If you think of the surface as being something like this, okay, basically this is always the ridge point of the surface. Okay. I don't know if my drawing is particularly clear, but essentially you're always on top if you're on this location over here, right? Okay, like the top of a hill. No matter where you get placed on the hill, you're always on the ridge of the hill, okay, in the appropriate space. Then this is called a dominant strategy for 1. Okay, and we can simply say that the payoff to the ith player from playing the dominant strategy for the ith player given any s minus I is greater than or equal to the payoff to I from playing some other strategy j, okay, given s minus I. Earlier we said, okay, for all s j I not equal to s I star, and for all S minus I. Added extra for all over here. So no matter what the other person does, no matter what happens, okay, S minus I, I'm always going to get as good as or better. And if it's greater than or equal to, then it's called weakly dominant. And if it's greater than, then it's called strongly dominant. Okay. Strongly dominant means this is definitely the ridge. Weakly dominant means that I may have a little bit of a plateau, you know, so they have other strategies also equally good, okay, when playing with the S minus I. But so if you have a dominant strategy, then you're in pretty good shape because you can play that. You don't worry. You don't have to assume that the other players are going to be rational with the dominant strategy. You just play it. No matter what they do, you're still going to be better than any other strategy. So these other strategies which did not make the cut are called dominated strategies. In other words, a dominated strategy is such that you can do better by choosing somebody else. Okay, and again we have strictly dominated and weakly dominated. Strictly dominated means they always are worse, and weakly dominated means they're sometimes worse. Either they're less than or equal to. That will be a weakly dominated strategy. So here's an example of a dominant strategy. So in Wi-Fi networks, we have something called the capture effect. What is a capture effect? Let's say we have let's say we have A wants to talk to B, and C is sending at the same time, let's say to D. All right. And what happens is the signal strength from A to B is really very strong. And even if C sends it, okay, it doesn't matter that C sent it. A has captured B. Okay. So for example, if your Wi-Fi card on your laptop is sending at, the maximum power is 1 watt. Okay, typically they're capped at 200 milliwatts. Let's say you bump it up and make it 600 milliwatts. Okay, so when you send to the access point over here, even if anybody else is transmitting, they just get blasted away. Okay, because you're just going to blast them away. That's called the capture effect. Well, let's see what happens to the game structure with capture effect. So we have the same thing over here. Well, with SD and DS, we know that right away it's going to be 0, 1, 1, 0 and 0, 1, and with 0, 0. The only change happens over here. If this guy sends and the other guy sends, let's say he is the stronger signal, you're going to get, okay, I guess this guy, it's going to be 0 or -1 depending on how you want to model it. I modeled it as -1 because they waste energy and actually didn't make progress. Okay, so other person wins. So this is what I call the Wi-Fi capture effect. What is the dominant strategy for this? Okay, take a look at this matrix. What is the dominant strategy for the column player over here? Sorry, S. Yes, send. Right. This is dominant strategy for S because if they play S, if the row player plays D. Sorry, if row player plays D, they get 1. If the row player plays S, they get 1. And it's always better than this. 1 is better than 0. 1 is better than 0. So if you've set the signal on your Wi-Fi card to be high, okay, then you should always be sending, okay, because the capture effect will help you. And this is the game. This is the game over here. All right. And the poor row player has got nothing to do. The row player has got essentially no options. So what this means is that it's what is a new word over here. It's incentive compatible. It's incentive compatible for you to set the power level if your transmission is high, okay, because it's going to give you better performance. Now, luckily for us, most of the traffic on the Wi-Fi networks is downstream from the access point to the laptops because you're usually downloading stuff, not uploading stuff. And the access points don't play this trick of changing power levels like this on you. So even if you were to increase the power level, it's not going to help you too much. So please don't do it. Okay? Or actually, I can say do it, but it won't help you. So increasing the power level for you is a weakly dominant strategy. It's not going to help you too much. It might help you, but most likely not. So it's still, the incentive is for you to do it because maybe it will help you. Okay, game theory says you should. Okay, IST says you shouldn't probably, but I don't know. Okay, so that's dominant and dominated strategy. Any questions on this over here? Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, now I want to kind of get into two special kinds of games, and because I guess these are pretty important types of games. All the games we've seen so far have been pretty straightforward. So let me first start with Bayesian games. So the Bayesian games come from the problem with applying game theory is that we don't know what the other player is going to look like. Okay, we don't necessarily know what the other player is going to look like and what strategies they're going to play. So let's take a very simple example of what I mean by what they're going to look like. Let's say we're playing a card game, all right, and I'm going to shuffle the cards and I'm going to distribute it, deal it, and so I have some cards, but I don't know what the cards the other person has. Okay, I don't know what they have. Now, given that I have some cards, if I can see what my cards are, let's say I have all 4 aces, then I know for a fact the other person doesn't have any aces. Okay, so I can make some probabilistic assumptions about what the other what cards the other player has. This means it's a 2-person game. So, but I don't know exactly what they have. I only know probabilistically what they have. So somehow I want to incorporate this. So if I set up this kind of card game in the form of a 2-person game, I don't even know what strategies the other person is going to play, because it depends on what cards they got, and I only have assumptions, probabilities on those. So in a Bayesian game, what we do is we model it like this. This is a modeling assumption. We say that each kind of hand that the other player can have corresponds to player type. Okay, it can be a different type of person. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have essentially a player type, and then once a player type is known, okay, after a player type is known, then they play a pure strategy. Okay, then they play exactly like a player of that type. So in other words, just like in a mixed strategy, all of the variability is extracted out from the strategy and put into the mixing probability. In the same way, in Bayesian games, all of the uncertainty about what the other player is going to do is extracted out and put into the player type. And then what we do is this. We have a player called nature. Okay, so nature makes the first move, and what it does is it chooses all the player types. And then after that, they play the game as they normally would, because at this point the player types have been cast in concrete. You know, this is a player type. So for example, I can have player of type 4 aces and, you know, so many kings and so many queens, etc., etc. I can represent it that fashion and say, okay, now that they have this, what strategy should they play? And then for each such move by nature, I have some probability of having that move. Okay, and then after that I can analyze it, and then to get the overall expected gain at the end, because only talk about expectation now, I can't talk about the actual payoff because it's probabilistic. So I'll say this probability of coming here, and then this probability having this outcome, and then having this payoff, and then I can sum across all of these, and then I'll get the overall expected utility from playing this Bayesian game. Okay, it's Bayesian because that's just why in a Bayesian network we have sort of some prior probabilities on the state of the world, which is the state of the world is another way of saying the set of player types that are possible. Okay, so that's a kind of a high-level view of Bayesian games. We actually will not study Bayesian games very much, and the reason is because in reality, Bayesian games, coming up with these prior expectations is pretty complicated. Okay, and it doesn't really help you too much in analyzing games. So it's an interesting sort of, in my opinion, interesting diversion, but not something that you will run across too much. We will look at briefly Bayesian games in the form of mechanism design when we do Bayesian mechanism design, but I just wanted to point this out to you. Now, one thing that we have in these Bayesian games is the possibility of what's called a signal. Okay, a signal is an indication from nature about the state of the world, and each player can interpret that signal differently to form expectations on the types of the other players. Okay, and that sometimes helps. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say that this is the Wi-Fi game with capture effect, and we have this other game which is Wi-Fi game without capture effect, which is -1, -1, the same game over here. Okay, so we can have a move by nature which says either the other player has a stronger card or not. Okay, I don't know. Okay, so in the move by nature, so there are two of you sitting in a room and you're trying to access, you're trying to use the Wi-Fi network, and the other person may or may not have a strong signal. If they have a strong signal, they're going to have capture effect and they're going to win. And if they don't have it, then you're into the normal situation over here. Okay, so we can say that we have two different states of the world, and the state of the world corresponds to, in this case, low, low. They both have low. Sorry, this is low, high. One has low signal strength, high signal strength. This one is called low, low. Okay, and then we have a similar. We can have HL, which I haven't drawn over here as well, I guess. And then we can have high, high as well. Okay, but let's just ignore those two. Those are actually similar to this in any case. The point is that there is this randomizing move by nature at the beginning. After that, the matrix is exactly as I've shown over here. Okay. Now, what about the signal? So, how can we? What does signal mean? Now, let's suppose that in my laptop I can measure the received signal strength. So, here is the access point, and I have one laptop over here, and here's the competing. So, this is my laptop. This is the competitor's, the competing laptop. Okay, and they're both trying to talk to the access point in this fashion. Now, when this competing laptop sends a signal, radio signal, actually I can hear it as well. Okay, and this is a signal in the actual electromagnetic sense of the word. It's not just a game theoretic word, signal. I'm using signal in, it's a pun. It's a very bizarre pun, but anyway. I can hear the signal and I can get what's called the received signal strength indicator, RSSI, which is a number that you can actually go look up. It tells you what the received signal strength is. So here's what I can do. I listen to the RSSI value, look at the RSSI value. If it is high, then I can say with high probability my competitor is in the high, has a high signal strength. Of course I know my own. So immediately I know whether I'm in LH or HH. Okay, but it's not going to be any of these two. Okay, either I'm going to be low if I'm the row player. Either if I see a high signal strength with with high probability. And of course, I don't have to say this. I can say maybe with 0.95 confidence I'm here, and 0.05 confidence I'm in one of these two branches. Okay, so you can see how. By observing the state of the world, observing a signal, we can start making expectations about the types of the other players. And that's what a Bayesian game does. So I haven't given the math for this, but the math for this is pretty straightforward. It's nothing more than saying, I have some prior expectations on the probability of each type, and then I just have to condition on this type, which means basically I have to multiply the outcome with this probability to give you the expected outcome over here. And then, if I have a signal, which I have, there's a move by nature, I have a signal, then conditioned on the signal, I can essentially trim down the set of possibilities, okay, and make my situation more refined. So there's a lot of symbols, but in the end, there's all there is to it, okay. I have some move by nature, and then I have a signal which allows me to determine my post-signal expectations. Conditional probability. So basically, I have to say, what is the probability that player J is of type K given signal is S? Okay. This tells me essentially the state of the world. It's just conditional probabilities. You just plug away at it. And if you know all these conditionals and you know what the signal looks like, you can go solve the game. It's just you take the game, you solve it as you normally would. As I'll talk about what solution means, and then you just at the end multiply off of these probabilities, and that solves the Bayesian game. Okay. Any questions about this over here? Okay. We'll come back to Bayesian type expectations a little bit when doing mechanism design. I want to now talk briefly about one more kind of game, which is called the repeated game. And I think I'm going to run out of time at that point. So what's a repeated game? It's pretty easy. Well, a repeated game is a game that repeats. Okay, so let's take the Wi-Fi game. In the Wi-Fi game, I only had one slot. And I ascend or I defer. One slot is over. How long is the slot? Depends on your packet size, but let's say roughly about half a millisecond. Okay, so I play 2,000 games every second in a Wi-Fi game. I play 2,000 every second. So in the couple of seconds I took to speak that sentence, maybe 6,000 or 10,000 games have already been played in this Wi-Fi game. So it can be quite fast. In a repeated game, what happens is that the players can adopt the strategy based on the outcome of the previous stage of the game. So we have the game divided into stages. This is like stage 1, then stage 2, and so on. So at this point, player 1 can play strategy 1, they can play strategy 2, or maybe 1-1, 1-2, S1-3, etc. And if you repeat it, let's say 10 times or 2,000 times, you have all these strategies that you can possibly do, and you have very large number of strategies that are available to you. So repeated games, generally speaking, are quite complex to analyze. Okay, there's a couple of things that I want to point out about repeated games. First one is that we have a conceptual problem deciding how to play these games in the first place. Why is that? Because typically speaking, we want to play a game so that the utility to a player is maximized, right? Now, let's say that this is an infinite game. Okay, if it's a finite game, that's a different problem. I'll come to that. But let's say it's an infinite game, and let's say over here I have some positive payoff. I have some positive payoff, some positive payoff for these strategies. Okay, pretty much any strategy that gives me even small positive payoff is going to give me what? An infinite return. Okay, because it's an infinite game. I'm summing an infinite series of positive numbers. So as long as I'm not doing something totally stupid, okay, I'm going to have infinite payoffs. And of course, all the utilities are unique up to an affine transform. So I can transform all the utilities to be positive, and then in which case anything I do is okay, right? Because the infinite sums of positive numbers. So we get into trouble with infinite games. And the way out of it is to look at either average payoff, which means the obvious thing. Basically, we look at the payoff over each of these and look at the average and hope that the average is a converging series. Or we look at what's called discounted payoff. And the discounted payoff says that, well, I'm going to start the game over here. So let's say the return for this is R1, the return over here is R2, and over here is RK. Then basically, my discounted payoff is sum k equals 1 to infinity. Return at the kth stage multiplied with beta to the power k, where beta lies in the range 0 to 1, I guess less than 1. So it's a discount factor. It says that it's like saying if I win 2 days from now, it's worth less to me now than winning today. Okay, so if you assume this is the case, again this assumption on the player's utility functions, then we can say that then these sums typically converge to 0, assuming that these are reasonably well defined. These sums converge, so we get a discounted payoff, and that allows us to analyze these games. Now, I said this is for infinite games, we need to do this. You say, well, what about a finite game? A finite game has a different problem, which makes it actually almost impossible to analyze and leads to very counterintuitive results. And the problem is in a finite game, okay, we have these multiple stages. So it doesn't matter how many stages we have in between. We have the last stage, okay, and then the first stage. Now, it turns out whenever you have a last stage, okay, we have to. This is a special stage. It's a special stage because there is no more follow-up after this. And so you're tempted to analyze the game like this. You're tempted to analyze the last stage separately and say, look, let me just look at the last stage because I know there's no more to be done. So I'm going to analyze this game, find a dominant strategy for this last stage. And then given this, I can now move backwards and say, okay, let me analyze the k-1 stage because I know the best thing to do in the last step. And if you do this, you end up essentially with completely irrational outcomes. Okay, and I'm not going to explain that over here, but if you look up what are called caterpillar games in any game theory textbook, you'll see this. So generally speaking, finite games lead to bizarre outcomes, and so people generally don't want to deal with finite games, and they rather deal with infinite games with discount factors, and then at that point, life is much easier because there's no last stage anymore. This it should remind you of the birthday paradox. Okay, for those of you who know the birthday paradox, this is this should look basically the birthday surprise. I don't know how many of you know this. Let's say I'm going to say that I'm going to give you a surprise birthday party this month. Okay, sometime this month. So you say, it can't be on the last day of the month, because if it's 30 days, on the 29th I don't have a birthday party. I know I'm going to have it on the 30th, right? So it can't be on the 30th. So let's take out 30th. If it's not on the 30th, then it should be on the, it can't be 29th, because on the 28th, I know that it can't be 30th, it should be 29th, so it can't be 29th either. And you induct all the way down and say, you can't have a surprise party, but yet you're surprised. So that's the birthday paradox. And that same kind of thing leads over here. That's just I'm just giving you a flavor of the kind of irrationality that results from finite games. So bottom line, if it's a finite number of repetitions, life is not very good. If it's infinite number of repetitions and we have positive payoffs, then we can't even draw an extensive form tree. We can't even represent the payoffs because there are no leaves, right? Infinite tree has no leaves. Okay, so infinite game in normal form, each matrix dimension is infinite. So we can't do that either. So we essentially just deal with one stage, and we kind of fake it by using averages or discount futures, and that, so you only end up, so infinite number of, with the game with infinite repetitions, you essentially only have to analyze one stage, and then you can do some math to get out the discounted future value. So that's what people end up doing. These kinds of repeated games are actually pretty popular in practice. There is a Prisoner's Dilemma, which is a game we'll talk about next time. And it turns out that Prisoner's Dilemma, when played once, is not so great, but when played multiple times, has some very interesting properties. Okay, and maybe when you talk about Prisoner's Dilemma, I'll talk about the repeated version of that. But there are some websites where you can go and actually submit your strategies for repeated Prisoner's Dilemma. And we'll discuss some of those, I guess, next time. Okay. So are there any questions about this over here? Okay, so I would urge you to go back, read through this material. It's only about 8 or 9 pages, because once we get into solutions of games, you really need to have this pretty thoroughly understood. And we'll talk about solution concepts next time. Okay, thank you.